I always thought my life with Clara was a quiet masterpiece, painted in soft hues of routine and trust. We'd been married 12 years, a stretch of time that felt like a well-worn path through a familiar forest. She was a schoolteacher, her days filled with lesson plans and chalk dust, while I worked as a carpenter, shaping wood into things people could use: tables, chairs, the occasional bookshelf. Our home in the suburbs was modest but ours, a two-story relic with creaky floors and a garden she tended with care. The roses were her pride, their petals a vivid red against the green. I'd watch her from the kitchen window sometimes, her hands in the soil, and feel a kind of peace I couldn't name. But peace, I've learned, can be a thin veneer. It started with small things, details so minor they barely registered. She'd linger after work, claiming parent-teacher meetings ran late. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, began staying in her purse, screen down. I'd ask about her day, and her answers grew shorter, her eyes drifting to the window or the clock. I told myself it was nothing. People drift, don't they? Marriages ebb and flow. I'd seen it with friends, heard their stories over beers at the bar. Moments of distance that always circled back to normal. Then came the night I found the receipt. It was tucked in her coat pocket, crumpled like an afterthought. I'd been looking for my keys, the ones I'd lent her that morning, and my fingers brushed the paper. A dinner for two at La Rosetta, a place we'd never been together. The date was a Tuesday, a night she'd said she was grading papers at school. $67, plus a tip. I stood there, the receipt trembling in my hand, and felt something cold settle in my chest. I didn't confront her, not then. I folded it back into her pocket and waited, watching her move through our house like nothing had changed. She hummed while she cooked, kissed my cheek before bed. But I saw it now. The mask she wore, flawless and fragile. The next day, I started paying attention. Her laugh, once bright, felt rehearsed. Her stories about school looped in predictable patterns, too polished, too vague. I'd ask about a student she'd mentioned, and she'd pause just a beat too long before answering. I began to catalog these moments, building a case in my mind. Was it paranoia? Maybe. But the receipt burned in my memory, a silent witness to something I couldn't yet name. I needed proof, not just hints, but something solid. So I decided to follow her. It wasn't a plan I was proud of, but it was mine. The first time I trailed Clara, I felt like a stranger in my own life. It was a Thursday, her late meeting night. I told her I'd be at the workshop, sanding a table for a client. She nodded, smiled, said she'd see me later. I waited until her car pulled out, then grabbed my jacket and keys. My truck stayed a block behind, headlights off when I could manage it. The streets were quiet, the kind of suburban hush that amplifies every sound. The hum of her engine, the click of her blinker. She didn't go to the school. Instead, she drove to a part of town I rarely visited, a cluster of low-rise apartments near the river. I parked across the street, half hidden by a row of pines, and watched her step out. She wore a dress I didn't recognize, green and flowing, her hair loose instead of pinned back like usual. She disappeared into the building, and I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, my breath fogging the window. 10 minutes later, a man arrived, tall, broad-shouldered, with a stride that spoke of confidence. He carried a bottle of wine, red label glinting under the streetlight. I knew him, Mark Evans, the gym teacher at her school. I'd met him at a staff picnic once, shaken his hand. He'd seemed harmless then, all easy grins and small talk. They didn't come out for 2 hours. I waited, the cold seeping into my bones, my mind spinning through every moment I'd missed. When she finally emerged, her hair was mussed, her cheeks flushed. Mark walked her to her car, leaned down, and kissed her. A slow, deliberate press of lips that made my stomach twist. She drove off and I followed again, back to our house. She was in the shower when I walked in, humming that same tune. I stood in the doorway, watching the steam curl around her silhouette, and said nothing. The lie was alive now, a third presence in our home. I started digging after that. Her phone was locked, but I found ways. Old emails she hadn't deleted. A spare key fob with a GPS tracker she didn't know about. The patterns emerged. Tuesday dinners, Thursday visits, a Saturday errand that took her to a motel off Route 9. Mark was always there, his car a constant in the frame. I took pictures, blurry shots through windows and windshields, timestamps marking each betrayal. I didn't sleep much. The workshop became my refuge, the whine of the saw drowning out the noise in my head. But the anger grew, sharp and relentless, carving me into something new. I didn't want to just catch her. That wasn't enough anymore. The images in my mind, Clara laughing with him, her hands on his shoulders, demanded more than confrontation. They demanded ruin. I started planning, late at night when she slept beside me, oblivious to the storm I was brewing. Revenge isn't a straight line. It's a maze, and I was willing to get lost in it. I needed something that would shatter her world as thoroughly as she'd shattered mine. And then I remembered Lisa. Lisa was Mark's wife, a quiet woman I'd met at that same picnic. She'd stood apart, sipping lemonade, her eyes tracking her husband with a kind of resigned patience. I found her on social media, her profile a mix of family photos and floral arrangements. She owned a small flower shop downtown. I went there one afternoon, pretending to need a bouquet. She was kind, her hands quick with the stems, but there was a tiredness in her smile. I wondered if she knew. I wondered if she'd help me. Took 3 visits before I told her. I picked a slow day, the shop empty except for us. I laid out the photos, the receipts, the GPS logs, evidence I'd carried like a weight. Her face didn't crumple. It hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "How long?" she asked, voice steady. "Months," I said. "Maybe more." She nodded, then handed me a rose, its thorns still sharp. "What do you want to do?" she said. I told her my idea, not the full shape of it, just the edges. She listened, her eyes narrowing, and then she agreed. We were allies now, bound by the same wound. Lisa knew Mark's routines better than I knew Clara's. She gave me dates, times, habits, details I could weave into something bigger. We met in secret, at a diner across town, plotting over coffee and untouched pie. She wanted him humbled, stripped of the life he'd built. I wanted Clara to feel the same emptiness I did. Our plan took shape slowly, a tapestry of deception and consequence. It wasn't about ending things cleanly. It was about making them pay in ways they'd never forget. The plan was intricate, a machine with too many moving parts, but that's what made it beautiful. Lisa and I spent weeks refining it, meeting in shadowed corners of the diner or her shop after hours. She'd bring sketches of Mark's schedule. I'd bring maps of Clara's movements. We synced their lives into a single timeline, a web we'd pull tight when the moment came. The centerpiece was a weekend retreat, a fake event we'd convince them both to attend separately, under different pretenses. Lisa forged an invitation for Mark, a team-building workshop for the school staff. I planted one for Clara, a professional development seminar, with a forged signature from her principal. We booked a cabin an hour north, a secluded place surrounded by pines and a lake that reflected the sky like glass. I told Clara I'd be away that weekend, a big job out of town. She didn't blink, just wished me luck and packed her bag. Lisa did the same with Mark, her voice steady as she sold the lie. They'd arrive expecting colleagues, agendas, name tags. Instead, they'd find each other and us. But that was only the beginning. The real cruelty lay in what came after. I rigged the cabin with cameras, small ones hidden in vents and light fixtures. Lisa handled the tech, her hands steady as she synced them to a private feed. We'd record everything, not for proof, but for leverage. The retreat was set for a Friday night, and I spent the day before driving up, checking every detail. The bed was made, the wine stocked, the lights dimmed just so. I left a note on the table, and signed, welcoming them to a weekend of connection. The irony wasn't lost on me. When Friday came, I watched from a distance. Clara's car pulled in first, her green dress catching the sunset. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, wine in hand, his grin wide as he saw her. They didn't hesitate, didn't question the emptiness of the place. They went inside, and the cameras caught it all, their laughter, their closeness, the way they moved together like they'd done it 100 times. I sat in my truck, a mile away, the feed streaming to my phone. Lisa was beside me, her breath shallow, her fists clenched. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The footage was raw, unfiltered, a mirror to their secret world. I didn't watch it all, not yet. Couldn't. But I saw enough. Clara's head on his chest, his hand tracing her arm. The ease of it all. Lisa turned away, her face pale, but she didn't cry. "What now?" she whispered. I told her to wait. The weekend wasn't over. They'd stay until Sunday, thinking they'd gotten away with it. We'd let them build their castle of lies a little higher before we burned it down. Saturday passed in silence. The cameras showed them cooking together, lounging by the lake, living a life that wasn't theirs to claim. I edited the clips, pulling the clearest moments, the ones that would cut deepest. Lisa worked on her end, gathering names. Mark's colleagues, Clara's friends, the school board. We'd send the footage, but not as blackmail. That was too simple. We wanted exposure, public and permanent. I found a printer in town, ran off stills from the video, each one stamped with a date and time. Lisa wrote letters, her handwriting sharp and precise, detailing every rendezvous we'd uncovered. Sunday morning, they left the cabin, parting with a kiss that lingered too long. I followed Clara home, my truck a shadow on the highway. She walked into our house like nothing had happened, her voice bright as she asked about my trip. I played along, my answers short, my eyes on her bag. The green dress folded inside. That night, Lisa and I met one last time. We mailed the letters, dozens of them, to everyone who mattered in their lives. Parents, co-workers, even the local paper. The stills went with them, a gallery of their betrayal. By Monday, the whispers had started. Clara's phone buzzed endlessly, her face paling with each call. Mark's too, I'd bet. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her unravel, and felt the first flicker of something like satisfaction. It wasn't over. Not yet. But the cracks were spreading, and I was ready to widen them. The letters hit like a storm breaking over dry land. By Monday afternoon, Clara's world was fraying at the edges. She sat at the kitchen table, her phone a live wire spitting calls and messages she couldn't ignore. I watched her from the doorway, pretending to sip coffee that had gone cold. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice flat, testing her. She looked up, eyes wide, and stammered something about a misunderstanding at school. "Parent complaint," she said. I nodded, let the lie hang there, and walked away. She didn't know I'd seen the names flashing on her screen. Her principal, her sister, a coworker who'd gotten one of Lisa's envelopes. The town wasn't big. Word spread fast, carried on whispers and sidelong glances. I went to the hardware store that afternoon, picking up nails for a chair I was building, and felt the shift. Old man Carter behind the counter didn't meet my eyes. Two women near the paint aisle stopped talking when I passed. I knew what they'd seen. Lisa had made sure the stills were clear, the faces unmistakable. Clara and Mark, caught in their stolen moments, now pinned up for everyone to judge. I didn't say anything. I paid and left, the weight of their stares a strange comfort. At home, Clara was pacing, her voice rising as she argued with someone on the phone. "It's not what it looks like," she kept saying, her tone desperate. I stood in the hall, unseen, and listened as she tried to patch the holes we'd blown open. She didn't suspect me, not yet. That was the beauty of it. She thought it was Mark's fault, some careless slip on his end. I heard her mention his name, her voice dropping to a hiss, and knew the cracks between them were widening too. Good. Let them turn on each other. Lisa called me that night, her voice low but steady. "It's working," she said. Mark had come home ranting, blaming Clara, claiming she'd set him up. Lisa played dumb, let him dig his own grave with excuses. She'd found more texts on his laptop, a hidden email account. She sent me screenshots, timestamps lining up with Clara's late nights. I added them to my collection, a growing archive of their ruin. The plan was moving, but I wasn't done. The letters were just the spark. I wanted a fire. Tuesday morning, Clara didn't go to work. She called in sick, her face pale as she sat on the couch, staring at nothing. I left for the workshop, but I didn't stay long. I drove to the school instead, parked near the staff lot, and watched. Mark was there, his car crooked in its space, his shoulders hunched as he walked inside. A group of teachers lingered by the entrance, their heads together, voices low. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The photos had done their job, his reputation was unraveling, thread by thread. I went home early, catching Clara off guard. She was in the bedroom, packing a bag. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She froze, then turned, her smile forced. "Just visiting my mom," she said. "She's not feeling well." I let her lie, watched her stuff that green dress into the suitcase. I knew she wasn't going to her mom's. Lisa had tracked Mark to the motel again, and I'd bet Clara was headed there too. They were clinging to each other, even now like rats on a sinking ship. I didn't stop her. I wanted her to run deeper into the trap. That night I met Lisa at the diner. She looked different, sharper, like the weight of her own pain had forged her into something new. We went over the next step. The footage from the cabin was still our ace, unplayed. We'd edited it down to a 10-minute reel, every moment a knife twist. Lisa suggested a public unveiling, something bold, something they couldn't deny. I liked it. We settled on the school's annual fundraiser, a dinner next week where the whole staff, parents, and board would be. It was perfect. Clara and Mark would be there, forced to smile through their shame until we dropped the hammer. I spent the rest of the week building. Not furniture, but the plan. I rented a projector, tested it in the workshop, watched their faces flicker on the wall. I printed flyers, vague enough to draw a crowd but pointed enough to hint at scandal. Lisa handled the guest list, slipping names to a friend who'd spread the word. We were careful, leaving no trail back to us. Clara came home late that night, her excuses thin. I didn't push. I just watched her sleep, her breathing steady, and felt the cold certainty of what was coming. The days before the fundraiser were a strange limbo. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes red, her voice brittle. She stopped pretending everything was fine. Too many calls, too many questions from people she couldn't avoid. I heard her crying in the bathroom once, the door locked, her sobs muffled by running water. I didn't comfort her. Couldn't. The man who'd loved her was gone, hollowed out by what she'd done. In his place was someone else, someone who saw her tears and felt only the urge to press harder. Mark was crumbling too, Lisa said. He'd been suspended from school pending an investigation. Parents had complained, citing the photos. He tried to call Clara, but she wasn't answering. Lisa intercepted his messages, feeding me updates. They were fracturing, their secret paradise turning to ash. I wondered if they regretted it yet, if they saw the cost piling up. I hoped they did. I wanted them to feel every ounce of it before the end. I finished the projector setup, hid it in a crate at the workshop. Lisa got us tickets to the fundraiser, anonymous donors, she told the organizer. We'd blend in, just another couple in the crowd, until the moment came. I rehearsed my part, the words I'd say when the lights dimmed and their faces lit up the screen. Clara kept asking why I was so quiet, her voice tinged with something like fear. I told her I was tired, busy with work. She didn't push, but I saw her watching me, searching for cracks I wouldn't let show. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the garage, the crate beside me, and played the footage on my phone. Their laughter echoed, their closeness a taunt. I paused on a frame, Clara's hand in his, her smile soft, and felt the anger flare again. It wasn't enough to expose them. I needed them to lose everything. Their jobs, their families, the lives they'd built on lies. Lisa agreed. She'd added her own touch to the reel, a voiceover of Mark's texts, his promises to Clara layered over their images. It was brutal, and it was ours. The fundraiser was held in the school gym, a cavernous space dressed up with white tablecloths and string lights. I wore a suit I hadn't touched in years. Lisa beside me in a black dress that made her look like a mourner. We slipped in with the crowd, nodding at faces I half knew, keeping our distance from Clara and Mark. They were there, separated by the room but linked by their tension. Clara sat with the other teachers, her smile tight, her hands twisting a napkin. Mark stood near the bar, his jaw set, his eyes darting like he expected an ambush. The projector was already in place, tucked behind a curtain with a volunteer Lisa had bribed, a kid who didn't ask questions. We timed it for the keynote, when the lights would dim and attention would peak. I mingled, my pulse steady, my face a mask of calm. Clara caught my eye once, waved weakly. I waved back, let her think I was there to support her. Mark didn't see me, he was too busy dodging whispers, his tie askew. The principal took the stage, her speech droning about community and growth. I nodded to Lisa, and she slipped backstage. The lights dipped, and the projector hummed to life. At first, no one noticed. The screen showed a slideshow of school events, kids with paintbrushes, soccer games. Then it flickered, and there they were, Clara and Mark, tangled together in the cabin, their voices faint but clear. Gasps rippled through the room. I stood near the back, watching as heads turned, as Clara's face drained of color. Mark dropped his glass, the shatter loud in the stunned silence. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "This is what they've been doing," I said, loud enough to carry. "While we trusted them." The reel played on, 10 minutes of undeniable truth. Parents stared, teachers whispered. The principal fumbled for the mic. Clara stood, her chair scraping, and ran for the door. Mark followed, his shouts drowned by the crowd's rising noise. Lisa met me at the exit, her eyes gleaming. We'd done it. The room was chaos, and they were at its center. Clara didn't come home that night. I waited, the house silent except for the ticking clock. Her phone went to voicemail, her car gone from the drive. I didn't call her. Let her run, I thought. There was nowhere to hide now. The fundraiser had ended in shouts and tears, the reel looping until someone yanked the plug. Lisa texted me updates. Mark had fled to his car, chased by a coworker demanding answers. The school board was already meeting. Emergency session called before the chairs were even stacked. I poured a drink, sat in the dark, and let the night settle around me. The phone rang, Clara's sister, her voice sharp with accusation. "What did you do?" she demanded. I hung up. The truth was out. They could wrestle with it however they wanted. By morning, the local paper had the story. Anonymous tips, they said, with stills blurred but recognizable. Clara's name was there, Mark's too, their careers teetering on the edge of collapse. I read it over coffee, the words a quiet victory. Lisa came by at noon, her face tired but fierce. "He's gone," she said. Mark had packed a bag, left her a note about needing space. She didn't care. She'd already called a lawyer. We sat on the porch, the air crisp, and planned the next move. The footage was online now, uploaded to a site no one could trace. Comments poured in, names I didn't know piling on the shame. Clara's roses wilted in the garden, untended, and I felt a grim satisfaction. She'd built this mess. She could live in its ruins. I found her bag later, abandoned in the hall. The green dress spilled out, a relic of her other life. I didn't touch it. I wanted her to see it when she came back. If she came back, the revenge wasn't over. It was growing, spreading. A shadow they'd never outrun. And I was just getting started. Clara came back 3 days later, her car crunching gravel in the driveway at dawn. I'd barely slept, the house a mausoleum of our past. She stepped inside, her hair tangled, her eyes sunken, wearing the same clothes she'd left in. The green dress was still in the bag by the door, a silent accusation she didn't notice. "Where've you been?" I asked, my voice low, standing in the kitchen with a mug I hadn't touched. She flinched, then squared her shoulders. "With a friend," she said. I needed to think. I let her lie hang there, thick as smoke. She didn't know I'd tracked her. Lisa had followed Mark to the motel, and Clara's car had been there too. They'd clung to their wreckage, plotting some pitiful defense. I didn't care. The town was buzzing, the online video racking up views, their names poisoned now. She moved past me, avoiding my gaze, and started unpacking like nothing had happened. I watched her hands tremble, her facade cracking with every folded shirt. That afternoon, the school called. I answered, her phone was off, and heard the principal's clipped voice. Clara was fired, effective immediately. Misconduct, they said, citing the footage, the photos, the parents' outrage. I hung up without a word and waited. When she emerged from the bedroom, I told her. Her face crumpled, a sob breaking free, but I felt nothing. What did you expect? I said, leaning against the counter. She stared at me, searching for the man who'd once held her through storms. He wasn't there anymore. She tried to explain then. Halting, tear-streaked words about loneliness, about Mark being a mistake. I listened, my silence a blade. When she finished, I walked to the garage and brought back a box. Every memento of us I'd found. Photos, letters, a necklace she'd loved. I dumped it on the table. Take what you want, I said. The rest goes tomorrow. She didn't move, just sat there, broken. I left her with it, the weight of her choices pinning her down. The next blow came fast. Lisa had pushed the video to a local gossip page, and it exploded. By Wednesday, it was on every screen in town, bar TVs, coffee shop laptops, even the library's public computers. People didn't just watch. They dissected. Comments named Clara and Mark, picked apart their every gesture. I saw it unfold from the workshop, my phone pinging with updates. Lisa texted me a screenshot, a petition from parents to ban them from school grounds, already at 500 signatures. I went downtown that day, needing screws for a project. The streets were alive with it. Clara's name whispered in the bakery. Mark sneered at the gas station. I stopped at Lisa's flower shop, found her arranging lilies with a grim smile. They're calling him, she said. Mark's phone was ringing off the hook. Old friends, his brother, even his pastor, all demanding answers. She'd sent the reel to his family too, a special delivery with no return address. Good, I said, and meant it. Clara stayed home, blinds drawn, a prisoner in her own shame. I didn't lock her in. She did that herself. The mail piled up, bills mixed with hate letters from strangers. One called her a disgrace, another a thief of trust. I left them on the counter for her to find. She stopped eating, her frame thinning, her voice a whisper when she spoke. I didn't soften. She'd chosen this path. I was just lighting it up. That night, I heard her crying again, louder this time, a wail that echoed through the house. I stood outside the bedroom door, listening, and felt the revenge settle deeper. It wasn't loud or fast. It was slow, relentless, a tide wearing her down. I slept in the guest room, the box of memories still on the table, untouched. Mark broke first. Lisa called me Thursday morning, her voice sharp with triumph. He'd shown up at her shop, disheveled, begging her to stop it. The calls, the video, the ruin. She'd laughed in his face, told him he'd built this cage himself. He'd left in tears, his car peeling out, and crashed into a pole 2 blocks away. Not hurt badly, but enough to make the paper again. Local teacher's scandal takes turn. The headline read. I smiled over breakfast, Clara silent across from me, her eyes on her untouched toast. She cracked that afternoon. The phone rang, her mother, shrill and furious, disowning her over the disgrace. Clara dropped it, the screen shattering, and sank to the floor. Why is this happening? She sobbed, looking at me like I could save her. I crouched beside her, close enough to smell her fear, and said, You know why. Her breath hitched, realization dawning. You? She whispered. I didn't answer, just stood and walked away, leaving her to connect the dots. She followed me, her voice rising, accusing, pleading. You did this. You ruined me. I turned, calm as stone. You ruined us, I said. I just made it public. She lunged at me, fists weak against my chest, then collapsed, a heap of regret. I stepped over her, grabbed my keys and left. The house was hers to haunt now. I'd sleep at the workshop, let her stew in the mess she'd made. Lisa met me there, her eyes bright. Mark was gone. Left town, she heard, his house up for sale. His career was ash, his marriage dust. We'd done it, she said, and poured us whiskey from a flask. I drank, the burn a quiet celebration. But Clara was still here, still breathing my air. I wasn't finished. Friday, I filed for divorce. The lawyer was a friend, quick with the papers, no questions asked. I had them served to Clara that evening, a courier knocking while I watched from across the street. She signed, her hand shaking, then shut the door. I didn't need her money, just her absence. The house was mine, bought before we married, and I'd keep it. She could take her clothes, her roses, her lies. I went home after, found her packing again. This time, she didn't speak, just moved like a shadow, collecting what little she had left. I'd emptied the bank account we shared, transferred it to a new one she couldn't touch. She'd get nothing from me. Not a dime, not a pitying glance. The box of memories was gone, burned, I'd guess, in the backyard pit. The smell of ash lingered, a fitting end. Lisa called with her own news. She'd sold Mark's car, his golf clubs, anything he'd left behind. The money went to her shop, a fresh start. We met at the diner, toasted to the carnage. "What about Clara?" she asked. I told her the plan's final piece. A billboard, rented downtown, set to go up Monday. It'd show their faces, the cabin stills, a caption, "Trust betrayed, paid for anonymously, untraceable." Lisa grinned, said it was perfect. Clara left that night, her car loaded, her eyes hollow as she glanced back. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, and watched her go. The streetlights caught her tears, but I didn't wave. She was a stranger now, a ghost of someone I'd loved. The house felt lighter without her, the air cleaner. I slept well for the first time in months. Monday morning, the billboard went up. I drove by, saw it towering over Main Street. Clara and Mark, frozen in their betrayal, the words bold against the sky. People stopped, stared, pointed. Phones came out, photos spreading it further. I parked nearby, watched the reaction ripple. Shock, laughter, disgust. It'd stay there a month, a public scar they couldn't erase. Clara was gone. Rumors saying she'd moved to her cousin's, hours away. Mark vanished too, no forwarding address. Their lives were rubble. Jobs lost, families fractured, reputations dust. I kept the house, the workshop, my quiet days. Lisa thrived, her shop busy with curious customers drawn by her story. We didn't meet much after. Our pact was done, our vengeance complete. The roses died, untended, their red fading to brown. I ripped them out, planted cedar instead, something sturdy, unyielding. The town moved on, but the billboard lingered in their minds, a warning carved in light. I'd lost a wife, a life, but gained something else. A cold, hard clarity. They'd betrayed me in shadows. I'd buried them in the sun. And that was enough.